One of the biggest differences between the 1968 and the 2020 election is that there were 3 candidates winning electoral votes in the 1968 election. The Democratic nominee was Hubert Humphrey, who was considered a New Deal liberal, a name influenced by FDR's New Deal, with ideas of promotion of social welfare, labor unions, civil rights, and regulation of business. The Republican nominee was Richard Nixon, who was moderately conservative, but his viewpoints not too different from New Deal liberalism. Because the election happened amidst civil unrest, Nixon emphasized law and order as a part of his campaign. In 2020, Donald Trump did the same. George Wallace ran as independent, and he was popular in the South, particularly in rural communities and among those in lower income groups and those with only a high school education. His support was very similar to Trump's, who has also appealed most to the white working class in rural communities. Like Trump, Wallace also bashed on his opponents. He said he and his followers would shake the eye teeth of the liberals in both national parties. Now, in 2020, Trump uses similar strategies to create an us versus them narrative and to appear as the honest, humorous candidate to his supporters.
They're Democrat-run cities, they're liberally run, they're stupidly run.
Sleepy Joe Biden? Pocahontas?
Both Wallace and Trump are prime examples of how political polarization has played a role in the elections. In the 1968 election, having a third candidate raised the possibility that no candidate would be able to achieve an electoral college majority. And while Wallace did secure 5 states in the South, Nixon received the electoral college majority. This year, the 2 candidates, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, competed in a very close race that ended in Joe Biden winning the electoral majority and the popular vote. Although both the 1968 election and 2020 election happened amidst civil unrest and tension due to increasing political polarization, the responses to the outcome were very different. In 1968, Hubert Humphrey, who received 191 electoral votes, and George Wallace, who only received 46 electoral votes, both conceded the election and expressed their congratulations to Nixon.
I do wish for Mr. Nixon the most success of any president in the history of our country.
Sure, you know that I have already called Mr. Nixon, expressed to him our congratulations. We've got a president-elect. He's going to have my help.
On the other hand, President Donald Trump has refused to concede, claiming that the election was fraudulent despite the lack of evidence supporting this. He has also refused to commit to a peaceful transfer of power.
There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation. The ballots are out of control. It'll be a very hard thing to concede because we know there was massive fraud.
Another parallel between 1968 and 2020 is the widespread protests. In 1968, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. brought about protests across the country addressing racism and the Jim Crow segregation system that was in place. Similarly, in 2020, protests across the world were sparked after George Floyd was murdered. These protests addressed police brutality, as well as the less visible and often ignored systemic racism. A final comparison between 1968 and 2020 is a pandemic that occurred in both of them. In 1968, the H3N2 flu strain originating in Hong Kong, China, became the cause of 1 million deaths around the world. In 2020, the infamous coronavirus originating in Wuhan, China, has caused 1,890,000 deaths. We have become more accustomed to our life in quarantine, having to reduce our social interactions by social distancing, doing school online, some with the privilege to work remotely from home, and curfews in some states. However, in 1968, life went on as normal. People went to work, students went to school, and public places remained open, at least in the United States, because in 1968, China was the epicenter of the pandemic. However, in 2020, the United States has become the epicenter. While the situation regarding the pandemic in 2020 was far worse than in 1968, they both revealed underlying racism in America. In 1968, the virus was referred to as the Hong Kong flu, which is a biased way of associating immigrants with disease. In 2020, President Trump derogatorily referred to the virus as the Chinese virus, fueling the risk of hate crimes against people of Asian descent. Because both 1968 and 2020 uncovered the racism that hides within the systems of the United States, more people, even globally, have become aware of this major issue. In 1968, after being awarded gold and bronze medals in the Summer Olympics, U.S. athletes Tommie Smith and John Carlos raised their black-gloved fists in a recognized salute to the Black Power movement. In 2020, there have been massive Black Lives Matter protests around the world, revitalizing the unity of the movement that fights to end racial discrimination. Although both 1968 and 2020 were tumultuous years, they both resulted in change that may not have happened without the mayhem.